My name is Walter Hayes, and I'm 68 years old. 3 weeks ago, I read a text message from my daughter that changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. I was sitting in my kitchen in Ohio, drinking coffee the way I do every morning, when my phone buzzed on the table. It was from Emily, my only daughter, my little girl, even though she's 31 now and getting married in 6 weeks. I smiled before I even opened it. I always smile when I see her name. The smile didn't last long. Dad, we've decided the ceremony and reception need to stay intimate. Close family only. We think it's best if you watch the live stream from home instead. We'll send you the link closer to the date. Hope you understand. I read it 3 times, then a 4th. I kept waiting for the rest of the message. The part that would explain this was a joke or a mistake, or that I'd misunderstood something simple. There was no more message. I set the phone down on the table next to my coffee cup, and I just sat there. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog was barking. Normal sounds on what should have been a normal Tuesday morning. But nothing about that moment felt normal. I am her father. I raised her alone after her mother passed when Emily was 9 years old. I braided her hair before school because I didn't know how, but I learned. I sat in a folding chair at every dance recital, every soccer game, every school play where she had 2 lines, and I clapped like she'd won an Oscar. I walked her through every heartbreak, every college application, every job interview she was nervous about, and now she was telling me to watch her wedding on a phone screen. I picked the phone back up and I called her. It rang 4 times before she picked up. Dad, hey, did you get my text? I did, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I want to understand, Emily. What does close family only mean? Am I not close family? There was a pause. I could hear something in the background. Maybe a television, maybe voices. It's not like that, Dad. It's about the venue capacity. Richard's family is huge, and his parents already have this whole list of people who need to be there for business reasons. We just don't have room for everyone. I'm not everyone, I said. I'm your father. I know, she said, and her voice softened just slightly. But you'll get the best seat in the house. Front row on the live stream. You won't miss a thing. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was trying to find the right words. The ones that wouldn't come out angry, because I have never once raised my voice at my daughter in her entire life, and I wasn't going to start now. Emily, I said slowly, I paid for that reception, all $65,000 of it. The venue, the caterer, the flowers, the band. I signed the contracts myself. I know, Dad, and we're so grateful. We really are. This isn't about the money. Then what is it about? Another pause, longer this time. Richard's parents think it might be a little awkward, you know, since you never remarried and half the guests are couples. And, Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I felt something crack in my chest, quiet and sharp, like a bone settling wrong. Awkward. That was the word she used. Not we love you, but the room is small. Not there's been a mix-up. Awkward. As if I was a stain on a tablecloth that needed to be hidden before company arrived. After I hung up, I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. On the wall behind me was a photograph from years ago. Emily at 7 years old, missing her front tooth, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair. Her mother had taken that picture 3 months before the diagnosis. 3 months before everything in our lives split into before and after. I built that girl's whole world back up from nothing. I worked double shifts at the plant so she could take dance lessons. I sold my truck the year she needed braces. I never remarried, not because nobody asked, but because I didn't want to bring confusion into her life. I wanted her to have one steady thing in a world that had already taken her mother. And now I was the awkward one, the one who didn't fit the photographs. I thought about calling my sister Margaret, but I didn't, not yet. I needed to sit with this alone first, the way I've sat with every hard thing in my life, quietly, without making a scene. Instead, I opened my laptop and I pulled up the folder where I kept every document related to Emily's wedding. The venue contract, the caterer's invoice, the deposit receipts, $65,000 spread across a dozen different vendors, all of it under my name. All of it paid from my retirement savings because I wanted my daughter to have the wedding she deserved. I looked at those documents for a long time. Then I looked at my phone again, at that text message still sitting on the screen. Watched the live stream from home instead. Something in me, something that had stayed quiet and patient for 68 years, finally stood up. I am not an angry man. I never have been. My whole life, I have believed that dignity matters more than being right, and that patience is a kind of strength most people don't understand until they're older. But there is a difference between patience and disappearing. There is a difference between loving someone and letting them erase you from your own life. I picked up the phone and I called the venue coordinator, a woman named Diane, who I had spoken with a dozen times over the past several months while planning every last detail. Diane, it's Walter Hayes. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course, Walter. What's going on? Is my name still listed as the primary contact and payer on the Hayes-Coleman wedding contract? There was a pause, the sound of her clicking through something on a computer. Yes, it is. You're listed as the sole responsible party for payment. Is there a problem? I looked out my kitchen window at the backyard where I used to set up a plastic pool for Emily every summer. I thought about the way she used to run to me when I got home from work, arms out, screaming, "Daddy," before she could even see my face clearly. "Diane," I said, "I need you to cancel the reception." The words came out calm, steady, like I was ordering coffee, not unraveling 6 months of planning in a single sentence. "Walter, are you sure? The event is in 6 weeks. There will be cancellation fees, and some of these deposits may not be." "I understand," I said. "I signed the contracts. I know what I'm doing." There was a silence on the line, the kind that tells you the other person is trying to find a polite way to ask what's really going on. "Is everything all right?" Diane finally asked. I thought about lying. I thought about saying something simple, something that would end the conversation quickly, but I didn't. "My daughter told me this morning that I'm not welcome at the wedding I'm paying for," I said. "She asked me to watch it on a live stream instead. So I think it's only fair that the people who are welcome figure out how to pay for it themselves." Diane didn't say anything for a moment. Then quietly she said, "I'm very sorry, Walter. I'll process the cancellation today." After I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry, exactly. I felt something heavier than that. A kind of grief I hadn't expected. Grief for a version of my daughter that maybe existed only in my memory, in old photographs, in a little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during Sunday afternoons. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled down a small wooden box I keep on the top shelf. Inside it were things I'd saved over the years. Emily's first shoes, a folded piece of paper with her handwriting from kindergarten, a ticket stub from the one father-daughter dance she ever let me take her to. I sat on the floor of that hallway, 68 years old, holding a box of memories, and I wondered how a person raises a child with everything they have, only to become someone that child is embarrassed to sit in the same room with. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Emily. "Dad, sorry if that came out wrong earlier. Talk soon?" I looked at the message for a long time. I thought about all the things I could say back. In the end, I typed only 5 words. "Call the venue. We'll talk." Then I set the phone down, closed the wooden box, and sat in the quiet of my own house, waiting to see what my daughter would do when she found out that some things, once broken, don't stay quiet for long. The call came 40 minutes later. I let it ring twice before I answered, not out of spite, but because I needed those extra seconds to steady myself. "Dad." "What is going on?" Feck's voice sharp, higher than usual. "Diane just called me. She said you canceled everything. The venue, the caterer, the florist, Dad. The flowers were non-refundable. We lose the deposit." "I know what I signed, Emily. Why would you do this?" Her voice cracked, somewhere between anger and disbelief. 6 weeks before my wedding? Do you understand what you just did?" I closed my eyes for a moment. Outside my window, a neighbor was mowing his lawn, and the ordinary sound of it felt strange against the weight of this conversation. "I understand exactly what I did," I said. "I stopped paying for a wedding I'm not welcome at. That's not fair. I told you it's not about you specifically. It's about the guest list. It's about Richard's family, Emily." I kept my voice even. "You didn't ask me to sit at a smaller table. You didn't ask me to skip the rehearsal dinner. You told me to watch my only child get married through a phone screen while I sat alone in this house. That's not a seating problem. That's a decision about who I am to you." She didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing, quick and unsteady. "Richard's parents are very traditional," she finally said, quieter now. "They think, a single father raising a daughter alone, it doesn't look right next to their friends. Their business partners will be their dad, Judge Coleman. Senator Hastings' family, they wanted the guest list to look a certain way. There it was, the real reason. finally spoken out loud. Not capacity, not awkwardness, appearance. So I was going to be hidden, I said. Like something you're ashamed of. I never said ashamed. You didn't have to. The line went quiet again. I thought about hanging up, but I didn't. Some conversations, once you start them, you owe it to yourself to finish. What am I supposed to do now? She asked. And for the first time, she sounded less angry and more afraid. The wedding is in 6 weeks. We have no venue, no caterer. My mother-in-law is going to lose her mind. I felt the old instinct rise in me. The instinct to fix things, to smooth the road for her the way I always had. I pushed it back down. I imagine you'll figure it out, I said. The way I figured out how to raise you alone. The way I figured out how to braid hair I'd never braided before, and pay for braces I couldn't afford, and sit through every recital by myself while other kids had 2 parents clapping. I figured a lot of things out, Emily. I imagine you and Richard's family can figure out a wedding. That's cruel, she whispered. No, I said. Cruel is telling your father to watch you get married on a screen because he might embarrass rich people. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking slightly, not from anger, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of standing my ground with my own child. In 68 years, I had never once done that. 2 days passed. I didn't hear from Emily, and I didn't reach out. Instead, I called my sister Margaret, who lives 2 hours away in Columbus. She's the only person who's known me long enough to tell when something is wrong just from the sound of my voice. Walter, you sound strange. What happened? I told her everything. The text message, the phone call with Diane, the conversation with Emily. Margaret was quiet for a long time after I finished. You canceled the whole reception, she finally said. It wasn't a question. I did. Good, she said, and the word came out fierce, almost fast, like she'd been holding it in. Walter, do you know how many times I've watched you disappear for that girl? At Thanksgiving, at Christmas, every single holiday, you sit in the corner so her friends don't ask questions about her situation. I've watched you shrink yourself smaller and smaller for 30 years so she never has to explain you. I hadn't thought of it that way before, shrinking. But as she said it, I realized she was right. I had spent years making myself smaller so Emily's life could look easier, more polished, less complicated by an aging, widowed father who worked with his hands. She's my daughter, Margaret. I don't regret any of it. I know you don't, she said, softer now. But there's a difference between loving someone and letting them treat you like an inconvenience. You finally saw the difference. That's not cruelty, Walter. That's self-respect. 30 years late, but it counts. After we hung up, I sat with her words for a long time. On the 3rd day, my phone rang again, not Emily this time, a number I didn't recognize, with a Columbus area code. Mr. Hayes? This is Richard Coleman, my future son-in-law. We'd met exactly twice, both times at dinners where he'd talked mostly about his father's law firm and barely looked in my direction. Richard, I said carefully, what can I do for you? I think there's been a misunderstanding, he said, his voice smooth, rehearsed. Emily may have communicated things poorly. My parents simply had some thoughts about the guest list logistics, nothing more. We'd love for you to reconsider covering the venue costs. The wedding is in 6 weeks, and frankly, it would mean a great deal to Emily. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the audacity of it was almost impressive. Richard, I said, let me ask you something. Did your parents ask that I be uninvited from my own daughter's wedding, or did I misunderstand that too? Silence. It wasn't quite yes or no, Richard. A long pause. They expressed some concerns. About optics. Optics, I repeated. About a widowed father who raised his daughter alone. That's the optics problem, Mr. Hayes. I don't think that's fair to my parents. I don't think it was fair to me either, I said. But I've decided I'm done being unfair to myself. If you want the reception back, you're welcome to pay for it. My checkbook is closed. I hung up before he could answer, and for the first time in 3 days, I felt something close to peace settle into my chest. But peace, I was about to learn, doesn't last long in a family that's finally being honest with itself. That evening, as I sat down for dinner alone, my phone buzzed one more time. This time it wasn't Emily, and it wasn't Richard. It was a text from a name I hadn't seen in 15 years. Richard's mother, Constance Coleman, someone I had spoken to maybe 3 times in my life. Walter, we need to talk. There are things about this wedding you don't know. Call me. I stared at the message for a long moment, an old, uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. Something told me this family had more secrets than a seating chart. I stared at that text message for a long time before I called her back. Constance Coleman. I remembered her from the 2 dinners we'd shared. A woman with a tight smile and a way of looking at me like I was a delivery driver who'd wandered into the wrong house. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been sitting with the phone in her hand. "Walter, thank you for calling." "You said there were things I didn't know," I said. There was a pause, the sound of a door closing on her end, like she wanted privacy. "This isn't easy for me to say, but I think you deserve the truth, especially after what my husband and son have put you through. Go on." The guest list issue was never really about optics, Walter. That was the story we told Emily, and honestly, the story we told ourselves too. The real problem is money. Richard's father has debts, serious ones. The law firm is in trouble, has been for almost 2 years. This wedding was supposed to be a show for his business partners, a performance of success, to keep investors calm while he tries to fix things quietly. I sat down slowly in my armchair, and I didn't fit the performance. "You did more than not fit it," Constance said, her voice tightening. "You paid for the whole thing. Do you understand what that means to a man like my husband? He needed people to believe the Colemans still had money, still had control. A father-in-law footing the entire bill undermines that story. So he decided the solution was to erase you from the room instead of admitting the truth." I sat with that for a long moment, the pieces sliding into place like a puzzle I hadn't wanted to see clearly. This was never about me being unsuitable or awkward or embarrassing. It was about a desperate man protecting a lie, and my daughter had been used as the delivery system without even knowing it. "Does Emily know any of this?" I asked. "No," Constance said quietly. "She has no idea her fiancé's family is drowning in debt. She thinks this is about tradition, about appearances. Richard doesn't want her to know, because he's afraid she'll leave, should she?" Constance was quiet for a long moment. "That's not my place to say, but I will tell you this, Walter. I've watched my son become someone I don't recognize these past 2 years. Desperate people make desperate choices. I don't think Emily fully understands what she's marrying into." After we hung up, I sat in my living room in the dark for a long time, the television off, the house silent except for the old clock on the mantel that had belonged to my late wife's mother. I thought about calling Emily immediately, laying everything out, but something told me to wait. If I came to her with this now, in anger on the heels of the wedding cancellation, she would think I was manufacturing a reason to justify what I'd done. I needed proof, and I needed her to see it herself. The next morning, I called an old friend from the plant, a man named Frank Delgado, who had retired into a second career doing background financial research for small law firms. Frank had helped me once before, years ago, when I suspected a contractor was overbilling me for home repairs. "Walter, good to hear from you. What do you need?" "I need you to look into a law firm," I said. "Coleman and Associates out of Columbus. Specifically, I need to know if there's financial trouble. That's public record work mostly. Court filings, liens, that sort of thing. Give me a day." Frank called back the following afternoon, and what he told me confirmed everything Constance had said. 2 pending lawsuits from former clients over mishandled funds. A second mortgage on the firm's office building, taken out 8 months ago. A tax lien filed just 3 months earlier. The Coleman family wasn't just uncomfortable with my presence at the wedding. They were standing on the edge of financial collapse, and they were using their son's marriage as a stage set to convince everyone otherwise. I printed everything Frank sent me. I put it in a folder, and then I called Emily. "Dad." Her voice was cold when she answered, still bruised from our last conversation. "If you're calling to apologize for the wedding..." "I'm not," I said. "I'm calling because there's something you need to see. Can you come by the house tonight? Alone." "Why alone?" "Because what I have to show you isn't something Richard should see first." There was a long silence. "You're scaring me, Dad." "I know," I said gently. "I'm sorry for that, but I think it's time somebody stopped protecting you from the truth, even if it's uncomfortable." Emily arrived at 7 that evening, still in her work clothes, her face tight with the particular exhaustion of someone who has spent 3 days fighting with everyone she loves. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd read her text message 8 days earlier, and I slid the folder across to her without a word. She opened it slowly. I watched her face as she read through the pages, watched the color drain out of it piece by piece. The lawsuits, the lien, The second mortgage. This can't be right, she said, her voice small. Frank pulled it from public court records. It's real, Emily. Richard never said anything about this. His parents. She stopped, pressing her fingers against her mouth. Dad, oh my God. Is this why they wanted the guest list so small? Why they didn't want you there? I talked to Constance yesterday, I said quietly. She told me herself. Your father-in-law needed the wedding to look a certain way, to reassure his business partners that the family still had money. A widowed father-in-law who paid for the entire reception didn't fit that story. So instead of telling the truth, they decided the easier path was telling me I wasn't welcome. Emily sat perfectly still, staring down at the papers in front of her. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with tears, but her jaw was set in a way I recognized, the same expression she used to make as a little girl right before she stood up to a bully on the playground. They used me, she whispered. They used both of us. I think so, yes. And Richard let them. He knew about all of this, and he let his parents humiliate you, and he never said a word to me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was sitting right there on the table between us, undeniable, and I could see something breaking open in my daughter's face, not just anger at the Colemans, but something deeper. A dawning understanding of who she'd agreed to build a life with. I need to talk to him, she said, standing up abruptly, gathering the folder against her chest. Tonight, Emily. I reached out and touched her arm before she could leave. Whatever you decide about Richard, that's your choice to make, and I'll support you either way. But I want you to know something first. She stopped, waiting. I didn't cancel that reception to punish you, I said. I canceled it because for the first time in my life, I stopped shrinking myself to fit into rooms where I wasn't wanted. I've spent 30 years making myself smaller so your life could look easier. I'm not angry that you didn't see it. I'm telling you now because I don't ever want you to learn how to shrink yourself the way I did. Not for Richard. Not for his family. Not for anyone. She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face softened into the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest. The one who used to run to me screaming, "Daddy," the moment I walked through the door. I have to go, she said, her voice thick. But Dad, I'm not done with this conversation, not even close. She left and I sat alone at my kitchen table. The folder gone, the house quiet again. I had no idea what she was about to walk into, what Richard would say, what his parents would do when confronted. All I knew was that the truth was finally loose in that family. And truth, once it's out, has a way of demanding to be reckoned with. My phone stayed silent for the rest of that night. And the next morning, it was a call from an unknown number that told me everything had changed far more than I could have imagined. The call came at 7 in the morning, pulling me out of a restless sleep. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer it anyway. Mr. Hayes, this is Nurse Patricia Owens calling from Riverside Memorial. Your daughter Emily listed you as her emergency contact. She's been in a car accident. My chest went cold. Is she all right? What happened? She's stable. Some bruising, a mild concussion. She was fortunate. But Mr. Hayes, you should probably come in. She's been asking for you. I don't remember most of the drive to the hospital. I remember gripping the steering wheel too tight, running a red light. I probably shouldn't have run. Praying in a way I hadn't prayed since my wife's diagnosis 19 years earlier. When I got to her room, Emily was sitting up in the bed, a bandage across her forehead, her arm in a temporary sling. She looked small in that hospital gown, smaller than I'd seen her look in years, and the moment she saw me, she started crying. Dad. I crossed the room and took her good hand in both of mine. I'm here. I'm right here. It was Richard, she said, her voice shaking. We were arguing in the car, about the money, about his parents, about everything. He was driving too fast, he wasn't paying attention, and she stopped, pressing her lips together. He ran the light at 5th and Union. A truck hit the passenger side. My side. Is he all right? Broken wrist, nothing serious. Her voice hardened slightly. He was more worried about the car than about me, Dad. Even after the crash, sitting there with glass everywhere, he was on the phone with his father about insurance and how it would look. I felt something twist in my stomach, a father's protective instinct rising sharp and immediate. What did you say to him before the accident? Emily took a shaky breath. I told him I knew everything, about the debts, the lawsuits, the reason his parents wanted you gone. I told him I couldn't believe he let them treat you that way. Let them treat both of us like props in some performance to fool his father's investors. And what did he say? He said I was overreacting. He said his family's reputation mattered more than hurting an old man's feelings. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. That's what he called you, Dad. An old man. Not my father. Not the man who raised me alone. Just an obstacle in his family's story. I sat down slowly in the chair beside her bed, my legs suddenly unsteady beneath me. In 68 years, I had absorbed a great many hard things quietly. But hearing that my daughter had nearly been seriously hurt over a fight, caused by another family's greed and shame, cut deeper than anything Constance Coleman had told me on the phone. I called off the wedding, Emily said quietly, staring at the ceiling, right there in the car before the crash. I told him I couldn't marry into a family that would use both of us and then hide behind lies when things got hard. He got so angry, Dad. I'd never seen him like that. You did the right thing, I said, my voice steady even though my hands were not. Did I? I don't even have a wedding to cancel anymore. No venue, no reception, and now no fiancé. Everyone is going to ask what happened. Everyone is going to want a specific story. I squeezed her hand gently. Then we tell them the truth. All of it. There's no shame in walking away from people who would rather protect a lie than protect the people they claim to love. Emily was discharged 2 days later with strict orders to rest. I brought her home to my house instead of her apartment, and for the first time since she was 18 years old, my daughter slept under my roof again, in the same bedroom that still had faded paint from a mural I'd helped her choose when she was 12. Word travels fast in families, even fractured ones. By the end of that first week, Constance Coleman called me again, this time not with confessions but with apologies, tangled and awkward, clearly born more out of fear of exposure than genuine remorse. Frank's research had apparently made its way, indirectly, into conversations with two of the firm's business partners, and the carefully constructed illusion of Coleman family stability had begun cracking in ways far beyond one canceled wedding. Richard called once. I let it go to voicemail and Emily deleted it without listening. Margaret came to visit on the second Saturday, bringing a casserole and her particular brand of blunt affection. She sat with Emily on the back porch for hours, the two of them talking quietly while I puttered around the yard, giving them space. When Margaret left that evening, she pulled me aside at the car. She's going to be all right, Walter. She's got your stubbornness in her. It just took her a while to find it. I hope so, I said. I know so, Margaret said. You raised a woman who, the moment she found the truth, chose it over comfort. That's not nothing. That's everything you spent 30 years teaching her, even if she didn't know she was learning it. 2 weeks after the accident, Emily and I sat together on the back porch one evening, the same porch where I used to read her bedtime stories on warm summer nights when she was small. Her arm was still healing, but the color had come back to her face, and something in her posture had settled, like a storm that had finally passed through and left clearer skies behind. I've been thinking, she said, watching the sun go down over the yard, about what you said, about shrinking yourself. What about it? I think I learned to do that too, without realizing it, making myself smaller so Richard's family would approve, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, apologizing for things that weren't my fault. She turned to look at me. I don't want to be that person anymore, Dad, and I don't want you to be that person either. Not for me, not for anyone. I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been tight and guarded for 30 years. I'm proud of you, I said, not for canceling the wedding, not for any of the drama. I'm proud of you for seeing clearly, even when it hurt. I learned that from you, she said, smiling faintly for the first time in weeks. 8 days too late, but I learned it. We sat there together as the sky turned orange, then purple, then dark, and for the first time since that first cruel text message had landed on my phone, I felt something that resembled peace settle over both of us, fragile, but real, and finally honest. But peace, as I would soon learn, was only the beginning of what still needed to be rebuilt. 3 months passed before Emily was ready to plan another wedding, not with Richard, but with a life she was rebuilding entirely on her own terms. In that time, a great deal changed, some of it quietly, some of it in ways that rippled far beyond our small corner of Ohio. Coleman and Associates dissolved that autumn. The lawsuits Frank had uncovered multiplied once other former clients came forward, emboldened by the first cracks in the firm's reputation. I heard through Constance, who called occasionally now, almost as though she needed someone outside her own collapsing world to talk to, that her husband had lost his license to practice law entirely. Richard, she told me, had moved to Chicago to start over, still bitter, still blaming everyone but himself for what his family had built and lost. I felt no satisfaction in hearing it. I had spent my whole life believing that dignity mattered more than being right, and I still believed that, but I understood something else now too, that dignity sometimes requires you to stop protecting people who never protected you. "Do you regret any of it?" Emily asked me one evening in early October, as we sat at my kitchen table going through old photographs for no particular reason, just the quiet comfort of looking backward together. "Not for a second," I said. "I regret waiting 68 years to learn the lesson, but I don't regret learning it." She smiled and slid a photograph across the table, the one of her at 7 years old, missing her front tooth, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair. "You kept this all these years." "I kept everything," I said. "Every ticket stub, every report card, every drawing you ever made me." A father doesn't forget the things that matter, Emily, even when the world tells him he should shrink away from them. She was quiet for a moment, tracing the edge of the photograph with her finger. "I want to have a wedding someday, a real one. Small, honest, nothing to prove to anyone. And when I do, I want you walking me down the aisle, sitting in the front row, giving a toast that embarrasses me in front of everyone." "I'd like that very much," I said, my voice thick. "There's something else," she added, reaching into her bag and pulling out an envelope. "I've been saving for the last few months. It's not $65,000, but it's something. I want to pay you back. All of it, eventually." I pushed the envelope gently back toward her. "You don't owe me money, Emily. You never did. I didn't pay for that wedding to be repaid. I paid for it because I love you, and I would do it again tomorrow if you needed me to." "Then let me do something else," she said. "Let me tell people the truth about what happened. Not to embarrass the Colemans further, but because I don't want other people's fathers to feel like a burden the way you did. I don't want anyone else's daughter to almost lose everything before she sees clearly." I looked at my daughter, 31 years old, sitting across from me with a strength in her eyes I hadn't seen since she was a stubborn little girl standing up to bullies on the playground, and I felt something settle deep in my chest. Something like pride, something like relief, something like the particular peace that comes only after a long storm has finally passed. That winter, Emily started volunteering at a local community center, working with single fathers navigating custody and family court, men who often felt exactly the way I had felt sitting at my kitchen table 3 months earlier, invisible, disposable, quietly erased from the lives of the children they'd sacrificed everything for. She told me once that every time she sat across from one of those men, she thought of me, of the folded piece of paper, with her kindergarten handwriting still sitting in a wooden box on my closet shelf. Margaret visited often that winter, and the three of us would sit around my kitchen table some evenings. The same table where everything had started with a single cruel text message, and now it held something different entirely. Laughter, plans, the sound of a family choosing each other honestly instead of out of obligation or fear. In December, almost exactly a year after that first text message, Emily asked me to walk with her down to the county fairgrounds, closed for the season, quiet and empty under a light snow. "I used to think canceling that wedding was the worst thing that ever happened to our family," she said, watching her breath fog in the cold air. "Now I think it might have been the best thing you ever did for me. You taught me what it looks like to choose yourself, even when it's terrifying, even when everyone around you says you're being difficult." "You taught me something too," I said. "You taught me that it's never too late to stop shrinking. 68 years, and I finally learned it because you showed me what it looks like to be brave." She looped her arm through mine the way she used to when she was small enough to hold my hand crossing the street, and we walked together through the quiet fairground, past the empty Ferris wheel frozen in the winter air, past the spot where a photograph had once captured a father and daughter on the happiest ordinary day of their lives. "I love you, Dad," she said, "and I'm sorry it took a canceled wedding and a car accident for me to see how small I'd let you become in my life." "You saw it in time," I said. "That's what matters. Not every family gets a second chance to see each other clearly. We did. We stood there for a long moment in the falling snow, Two people who had nearly lost each other to someone else's shame, someone else's desperate lies, and had found their way back through nothing more complicated than the truth, finally spoken out loud. I am 68 years old, and I spent 30 years believing that love meant making myself invisible so my daughter's life could look easier to the world. I know better now. Love isn't about disappearing for the people you care about. It's about standing steady enough that they can find their way back to you, even when the world tries to convince them you don't belong in the room. My daughter found her way back to me. And in the process, we both found something we didn't know we'd lost. Not just each other, but ourselves.